I want to tell you a story about a kid that lives in New York City. Well, he's not really a kid. He's 21, 22 years old, and he's in his first career job out there. And this one day, he was the last one to leave the office because he was responsible for a bunch of payroll and paperwork and that sort of thing at the end of the month. And he had to stay a little bit late, but he didn't mind because it was also the night of an annual Christmas party where he would get together with a bunch of friends of his from university that still live in the same house, and they would get dressed up as their favorite Christmas characters and have a real big time. And so he got all the necessary paperwork together, did everything he needed to do, and left the office and headed down to a bank where he needed to make the deposit. And so he's walking through the streets of New York, and it's really crowded, and it's loud and busy, and there's bright lights, and there's music coming from the stores, and there's a bit of snow in the air, and he's all excited about the party, and he thinks to himself, I'm going to go this year as Gabriel, as the angel that appeared to Mary. And as he's walking along, he comes to an intersection, and he needs to stop and wait for the light to turn green. And while he's standing there, he says to himself, I wonder if there really are angels. And if there are, where are they? And what do they do? He says to himself, if I was an angel, I would be big and bold and brave, and I would do this and that and the other. And while he's saying this, he doesn't notice that not 10 feet away from him, there's a homeless man begging change. It's amazing to me how the things we want to do get in the way of the things we ought to do. So anyways, the light changes, and he crosses the street, and he gets to the bank and signs the necessary forms and does what he needs to do and heads off to his party. Now, there was just the one guy waiting at the bank for him. Everyone else had left early because it was also the night of their annual Christmas party. A very different event, the top floor of a swanky midtown hotel. But this guy was just as excited nonetheless. And so when all the paperwork was done and he was able to leave, he started heading the opposite way down that same street. And he's walking along, and he comes to that same intersection. He crosses it and comes by that same homeless guy. But the difference is when he passed, he reached in his pocket, and he pulled out a big wad of $20 bills all rolled up and handed it to the guy and just kept on his way. And as he walked away, he said to himself, if I keep doing stuff like that every couple months, surely the good Lord and his angels will look after me. It's just as amazing to me how the things we want to believe become the things we do believe. Now, this homeless guy had been there all day, and now he's cold, and he's tired, and he's hungry, and he decides to pack it in. He remembers that it's the night of a Salvation Army care package and sing-along down at a Bowery shelter. So for the first time in a long, long while, he gets in a cab. And he takes a cab down to the shelter, and he's a little bit late, but there's one seat left right beside a guy that they call Sailboat. And so he has a seat there beside him. And now Sailboat has been on the street for years and years and years, a life full of mental health and addiction and violence, sad, a very tragic, tragic life. And so the two of them are sitting there, and they're going through their care packages, through their, they got their new toothbrushes and their new underwear and their New Testaments. And meanwhile, there's a quartet of Salvation Army officers at the front of the room singing songs about angels. And right in the middle of it, Sailboat turns to the guy, and he starts talking to him about angels. And he's talking like they're real. And he says he saw a bunch that very day. He says he sees them all the time. He says he saw two when he was downtown by the mall. He says he saw a bunch flying high up above the park on his way over to the shelter. He even claims he saw two on either side of the door when he walked into the shelter that night. Two great big guys, big godly-looking guys. They're like soldiers with swords and shields and really, really white teeth. Now, whenever I hear a story about a guy like Sailboat, I always wonder, does he see the angels because he's crazy, because of his life on the street? Or do the angels just stick close by him because he's crazy and because of his life on the street?